Hello everybody, today I'm going to be sitting down and ranking all 11 episodes from Doctor Who Series 11, and yes, that does mean that I am going to be including resolution in my ranking. But before I get started, I just want to keep in mind that this is entirely my opinion. Your ranking almost certainly won't line up with mine, and that is totally okay as long as we are both having fun. Also, if you'd like to let me know what your ranking of the Series 11 episodes is, that would be awesome. I would love to see what you guys have to say about these episodes. Also, keep in mind that there are going to be some spoilers for Series 11 in this video, so if you don't want spoilers for Series 11, then feel free to bow out now. And with all that established, this leaves us with 11 episodes to rank, so without further ado, let's get started. Ultimately, the Saran Conundrum's biggest crime is that it is so dull. Very little happened in this episode to engage me as an audience member, and while the cast was doing their best and having fun and interacting and ultimately providing for some lighthearted moments, the overall story was just a really boring one, and I felt just super drained watching this episode having nothing to latch on to, and that's unfortunate because I did like these characters. The Witchfinders is far from a bad episode, and it's far from a great one too. The cast provide for some entertainment, but it is dragged down by the cheesy performance for King James and the witches, which are just not an intimidating villain, and just the turn at the end with a really familiar and boring climax. But it does have some nice elements in there, and it ultimately results in a decent story that I found myself relatively entertained by for the majority of its run, but unfortunately bogged down by some poor elements. Arachnids in the UK is not a bad episode. It's a pretty solid one, but there are elements that really don't work as it, such as the politician whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. But overall, it is an engaging story with the Doctor and the companions, and I really like how it ends, showing why each of them wants to travel with the Doctor. That was the strongest part of the episode, and it really added a lot to it. But overall, it is relatively entertaining, with some rather weak storytelling elements and things that don't quite make sense. But ultimately, it is an enjoyable, solid episode of Doctor Who for the most part. The Battle of Rancic is a good episode. It is not a miss, but it's also the weakest of the finales. It does have some good stuff with Graham and the Doctor, as Grace has died and he wants to get revenge for that, and ultimately I like what came out of that, and this was a good episode. There were some elements that weren't fully utilized or were just kind of half-assed, such as the Ux and stuff like that just didn't quite add up, but Mark Addy made a great guest performance, and the Doctor was solid, and Tim Shaw made a good enough villain, so this was a solid finale, although not the best. The Woman Who Fell to Earth was a really enjoyable starting point for this Doctor. I liked the introduction of the Doctor and of the companions, and I found it to be a really solid story. And while it's far from the best Doctor introduction, it does a good job at doing what it needs to do, and it sets the tone for the show, and it sets the style for the show, and it's a clear vision of what Chris Chibnall wanted to achieve, and I think he did a good job of introducing all of these elements and setting his style of Doctor Who in stone like this. I thought it was a good episode, and it was a well-executed idea. The Ghost Monument is a pretty underrated episode, because I do think this is, for the most part, just a solid episode of Doctor Who. There's some mysterious elements going on here. I really like the start of the episode. It starts off really well. There's some great cinematography, and the guest actors do a great job with their performances, and there's just some elements that work really well here with the world building. But ultimately what makes it is those final couple of minutes with the TARDIS, which is just a brilliant final scene, which brings the episode from good to really good. I love that final few minutes of the episode. It's really beautiful, and I just adore watching that scene with the Doctor and being reintroduced to her TARDIS and showing it to the companions. It's really well handled, it's really well done, and ultimately it results in a really enjoyable episode of the show. Moving definitively into the upper half here, we have Demons of the Punjab, which is not just a solid episode, but it's one that sticks with me the more that I think about it. I really like the elements they have here with the partition of India and the brothers here, and just what is evoked out of that. I thought that's handled really well, and the villain, which is not a villain, whose names I cannot remember, it's been a while since I've seen it, are handled really well, and that's a nice element that's used very well in the episode. Although it is familiar, it is executed well, and I just find it to be a really kind of a beautiful episode, and one that I appreciate more with each viewing, and I just really am glad that I saw this episode. It was solid, and it was really one of the betters of the Jodie Whittaker era. Kerblam! What a fun episode of Doctor Who. I just find myself just having a grand time when I put this one on. There's just elements that are just done really well here, but mostly it's just the writing, the dialogue that just kind of stands out to me. It's handled really well by Pete McTighe, if I remember who wrote this one correctly. He did just a really solid job writing a really solid episode. And just the companions are used well, the Doctor's used well, and basically everyone gets a really solid balance in this episode, which I felt the show hadn't really done all that well up to this point. And I just think that this writer did a really good job of nailing what needed to be nailed, and I found myself very happy with this one. And at the time that it came out, it was my favorite one of the series, or of the season, which was great. So yeah, solid episode. Resolution has its problems, but the things that work in this episode work so well for me that it balances out to being a great episode. Honestly, I think the Dalek is handled really well. It has a really great reintroduction to the Daleks, a very unique one, and I didn't know how they were going to be able to handle it because they've been brought back so many times that doing it uniquely at all is just such a massive challenge, and they pulled it off. And there were some great scenes utilizing the Doctor, and of course Ryan has some stuff with his dad, which I thought was handled well and was a good element in this. And I just think that they found a really unique way to bring the Daleks back and make them menacing, although it was of course only one this time, and I just thought that was handled so well. This episode really stands out to me as being a solid episode of the show. It just really worked, and there are elements towards the end of things that are unbelievable. The way that they resolve it just doesn't quite make sense to me. It doesn't add up. I wasn't able to get on board with that, but the introduction is so good that a slightly weak conclusion was okay for me, and it resulted in what I thought was a great episode. I think Rosa has been a lot of people's favorite of this season, and not without reason. This is a really well handled historical episode of Doctor Who, although not a pure historical. The elements that are in here work really well. It tackles racism really well. The Doctor and her company don't mess with history in a way that feels like it cheats what happened, what legitimately happened. It feels like it's true to history, and the villain is appropriate. As basic as the villain is racism, and racism is not that complicated, people. So personifying racism is not going to be a good thing necessarily, and I thought it was a wise choice to not do that, to not even head towards that, and instead they aimed towards the elements that really work, the emotional elements, the stuff with Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was handled really well, and the companions were handled really well, and the Doctor was handled well, although Yaz does get a little bit of the short end of the stick, but this episode was just a really solid episode, and it brought out emotion from me, and that is something that I genuinely appreciate, because it's not something that happens terribly often, but this episode managed to do it, and I left very satisfied with this one. There Was No Way That It Takes You Away was not going to make it number one on this list. This is the episode that really stood out to me above the rest as being a great episode of Doctor Who. Just a really fantastic one. It was such a surreal experience watching this one for the first time. I remember exactly where I was, I remember exactly who I was with, and I remember how I felt going through the motions of this episode, which were just surprising and interesting and all over the place, but in a really good way. The turns that it took I never expected, and the way that it kept revealing more of what was going on and confusing me a little bit more, and then ultimately making so much sense in the end, was just handled really well. And there's only one tiny nitpick I have, and that's that the frog is just a little too weird for me, as weird as this episode gets. But I really love the stuff that they have with Grace. I thought that's handled beautifully. Such amazing scenes with Graham and with the solid track. That stuff it just all makes sense, and it's all handled really well. And I just really dug this episode so much, and I think it's super underrated, and I wish this episode was appreciated more, because I think it's a fantastic episode of Doctor Who. I think it is among the best, and by among the best I don't mean top 10, but among the best episodes of Doctor Who. It's great, it's engaging, it's entertaining, all of the companions and the Doctor are treated well, except for Yaz gets a little bit of the short end of the stick in this one. But it's handled really solidly, and it's a beautiful episode, and it's an episode that I find myself returning to more than any other on this list. So yeah, those are the 11 episodes of Doctor Who Series 11 ranked. Do you agree with me? Tell me why you don't, because there's no way anyone agrees with my list. Putting Arachnids so low and then Ghost Monument so high and It Takes You Away so high. There's no way that anybody is going to be able to get behind this list, but that's totally fine. Tell me what your list is down below. I will be happy to see what you have to say and strike up a conversation with you. I'm very interested. But yeah, what did you think of Doctor Who Series 11? How would you rank the episodes? I'm very curious. Just let me know down below. I'm going to be returning soon with more reviews of classic Doctor Who, as well as lots of TV reviews, lots of stuff going on. You can check out all that stuff on this channel if you'd like to. If not, it's no big deal, but I just appreciate your time today. So yeah, that's going to do it for now, folks. Thank you for watching. Take care, and have a lovely week.